Welcome to the American Family Association presents New York State's growing fiscal problems around taxes and our fiscal crisis. Tonight we have as our guest Anita McDougall, who attended Vassar College and has an MBA from NYU. Anita has worked for a major New York City bank on a nutrition education program in the Philippines as well. She now works as an independent consultant. In recent years, Anita has dedicated herself to the rising tax problems in New York State and Long Island and the growing imbalance between the public and private sectors. Also with us tonight is Frank Russo, who's a former division manager with AT&T and Verizon and serves on the executive committee of the Long Island for Education Reform, as well as the Nassau Conservative Party. Frank has an engineering degree from Manhattan College and an MBA from Baruch. He's married 45 years with 7 children and 28 grandchildren. Welcome. New York State's property, income, sales, and estate taxes are among the highest in the nation. This is the key reason why people continue to leave New York State, as many as 3 for every 2 that enter into New York. Our public employees are the highest paid public employees in the nation. The typical Long Island teacher now earns over $90,000, and per Newsday, the average Long Island policeman earns over $130,000 when overtime is included. On top of this, our benefits costing you and I, the taxpayers, more than $30,000 per employee. New York's huge budget deficit places its credit rating in jeopardy. Also, New York's Medicaid costs far exceed those of any other state in the union. Should taxes still be higher? Can costs be reduced? That is our topic tonight. And my co-host tonight is Patty Knapp.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
Welcome again. Anita, New York is facing a serious credit crisis. In your view, what will happen if we fail to balance our budget?
Well, I think we will suffer, New York State will suffer when it goes out into the financial markets to fund its obligations. The credit rating will go down and interest costs will escalate. We can look and see what happened in California. California hasn't had enough money to pay its obligations and has sent out IOUs to its vendors. I really don't think we want to be in that position.
No, it's not a good example to follow, for sure. Frank, do you want to respond to that?
No, I think Anita said it all. If we don't get our budget in line and eliminate the deficit, our credit rating will suffer, and we're going to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in additional interest, more interest per year for many years going forward, and we don't need that at this time.
It's like a train wreck coming
That's
down.
right.
What are the options available to our state government? The deficit over the next 3 years is expected to be more than $40 billion. What actions do you think we could take, if any, to prevent that?
As I see it, there are only 2 possibilities, 2 choices. You either increase taxes, which, as Michael said, are the highest in the nation. Our property taxes, sales, income, estate taxes, when you combine all these together, we are the highest in the nation. Some years we fall to number 2 position, but typically we're the highest in the nation. That's why so many people are leaving New York State. 5 of my 7 children have left New York State. It's a disaster, and you can see what the future holds for our children and our grandchildren. The alternative to raising taxes is to cut spending. So those are the 2 choices that New York State legislature, the New York governor, the taxpayers face. Either increase taxes more to reduce the deficit or eliminate it, and our deficit right now is about $3 billion, and for the next 3 years it's projected to exceed $40 billion. $40 billion.
It's astronomical.
Mind-boggling. Now again, California is even worse. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. But we are the second worst. I think Jersey is 3rd. I think we're in 2nd place. We've got to do something to cut this, the current 2010 $3 billion budget, which is going to be higher for the 2010-11 year, $40 billion over the next 3 years, or we cut costs. And my view, the cutting of costs is the appropriate actions we should be taking.
That I would think most taxpayers would prefer. Anita?
I agree with Frank in that respect. And we have a tremendous pension tsunami that we are in right now. The obligations of, various retirees and coming retirees are going to overwhelm us, and we really have to look at that as to a possibility of cost savings.
You both highlight some of the issues. I would just add one other fact that I read this week, which was that New York State's debt has quintupled in the last 5 years.
Wow.
That is just mind-boggling. For anybody who thinks that these people have been responsible, I would challenge that. When I saw that statistic, that is just mind-boggling. In 5 years, we have quintupled our debt. Now, having said
And
that,
is that true? It's because of these other agencies that incur?
correct.
Yes,
When you
that's what I
include all
thought.
the outstanding agencies that are part of New York State government, quintupled. It's gone up by 5 times the amount of debt issued in the last 5 years. That's just
hard to
mind-boggling.
imagine.
Like, if people don't already appreciate how difficult these challenges are, you add that burden in as well. It is very, very difficult to comprehend how they're going to solve this. But having said that, what, in your opinion, Nita, are some of the issues that are holding up action by our state leaders from addressing these issues?
Well, I think catering to special interest groups, specifically unions, and the voting bloc power that they represent is, I think, primary. No politician wants to deal with that in a constructive way for the taxpayer. For example, the pension situation. Private industry essentially has defined contribution pension plans where you know what the cost is every single year. But the municipal employees and the government employees and teachers have a defined benefit plan. So depending upon what they've earned in the last few years, et cetera, and they can also, depending upon what tier they're in and what contract they've had, they can cash in their unused sick, their unused vacation, and in some cases, unused car expense, et cetera, and bulk up their pensionable credits. And this is, they're unknown costs. We can't plan for that, and that definitely has to change.
Frank, your thoughts?
Yeah, the thing that's holding it up, as Anita said, is the intimidation felt by our state senators, our state assemblymen, Governor Patterson, although he's been speaking out somewhat more forcefully lately, but our legislators are terrified of the public employee unions. And don't get me wrong, just for the record, my mother was a New York City public school teacher. My wife taught in the public schools before we started our family. I have two daughters-in-law teachers. I'm not anti-teacher. My father-in-law was a retired policeman, New York City policeman. I know probably 100 county, town, state employees, and they are very good people in general, no question about it. Fine, fine people. So I'm not trying to insinuate anything about the quality of our public employees. But what's happened over the last 5-6 decades is clear-cut. It's reported in even liberal publications like the New York Times and the Daily News, and more conservative publications like the Post, New York Post, and Wall Street Journal. Even Newsday will talk about this, that back 60 years ago, 1950 or thereabouts, public employee salaries, everyone knew, were below the salaries of comparable employees in private industry. And so, to be fair about it, they said, well, to entice people to take these public employee positions, teachers, policemen, county, city, town workers, state workers, we'll give them better benefits, health benefits, pension benefits, time off, and so forth. And so they did that. They gave them very generous benefits, far better than most private employees. But what's happened over the past 60 years is now public employee salaries, and some of them don't even know this, but it's been reported on in a number of studies, Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, public employee salaries exceed those of private employees of comparable training and so forth. But nothing's been done to rein in the benefits. Private employees' benefits have been slashed to the bone. Private pension plans are pretty much eliminated in the bulk of private industry. Private companies have cut them, eliminated them. They've gone to, as Anita said, defined contribution plans, where the employee puts in 3 or 4 or 5% of their salary, and the employer matches it. And that's what we ought to be considering to do for public employees. But the employee unions don't want anything like that. Their pensions are calculated in ways that are extraordinarily beneficial. No private company includes overtime when they calculate a pension. And I think Anita insinuated that. Only public employees do they take an overtime. So what happens is, you get policemen, you get teachers, and you get public, and they work it out so that the last year, or if it's 3 years, last year or the last 3 years, they put in extra overtime, they build up their salaries, and their pensions then are enormously higher than what they ought to be in a fair and just way. So the answer, though, to your question is our state legislators are terrified of our very, very powerful public employee unions, especially the teacher unions.
But I would just respond very quickly. Isn't it also a reflection, though, of voter apathy? I mean, the unions have always been able to turn out the vote for these people, and doesn't it behoove us to challenge the people that are out there watching the show tonight to get more involved in
No
their
question.
community?
Absolutely.
No question.
I mean, we ought to blame. If to the extent that turnouts in off-year elections are 40%, 35%, and even in the presidential years maybe it's 60 or 65%, that shows that the people ought to blame also, because and even with those that vote, they're voting for people that are hurting them, and they don't understand it. There's a lot of ignorance in the voting process. It's almost an insurmountable problem. The future looks very bleak in my view.
Well,
I don't know if Anita agrees
trying to
with
remain
this.
optimistic.
I want to be optimistic. I want
and-
to educate the public regarding these issues.
And we share that when we support that goal. But I think this year and the future years that we're looking at are exacerbated because of the recent stock market decline, as it's been chronicled in many of the publications throughout New York and in New York City particularly. Our state pension fund is said to have lost tens of billions of dollars in that market decline. And while the market has improved somewhat, our current pension obligations are several hundreds of billions of dollars at the moment. Are there problems with the way our current state pension system for public employees is architected? And how effective, in your opinion, was the recent reform legislation that was passed, I believe, creating a Tier 5 system? What are your thoughts?
First, with respect to the pension system in New York State, the pension, the person who's earning the pension or is going to get the pension shares absolutely no risk in market volatility. For example, my IRA went in the toilet last year.
You're not alone.
All right, and the teachers, which is the subsection of the public employee group that I'm most familiar with, they don't share in that risk at all because they're guaranteed a return. So consequently, they do this sort of average over 5 years, et cetera. DiNapoli is coming up with an average as to what the individual school districts will have to contribute to make the TRS whole. And that is going to be a major amount of money during the next budget cycle that's coming up. And I think this is wrong.
So just so that our viewers understand what you're saying, basically they are insured against loss because
That is correct.
they will always get a specific return courtesy of the way the system's architected.
That is
As you
correct.
and I in the private sector suffer losses with years where there's hopefully double-digit gains from time to time to offset those losses, in the private sector, or in the public sector, I'm sorry, they're constantly insured against that perspective of loss.
That is correct.
That's a huge benefit.
It's an amazing benefit.
And it's the taxpayers that have to make up that loss.
That is correct. And the average taxpayer does not understand this at all. I mean, there are several myths out there. For example, it's for the children and teachers are underpaid. And teachers are not underpaid on Long Island. In my local school district, the average teacher makes $93,000 before benefits.
They're certainly not underpaid on Long Island, that's right.
That's wonderful. And the other thing that very many people do not understand is when they do receive a pension, that pension is not subject to New York State income tax as long as they live in New York State, which is another tremendous benefit.
Well, I want to direct the question to you, Frank, and we've had other people on the show. I'm trying to think of the young man who came out from Huntington who was a teacher, and he argued vehemently about, just to balance out the arguments to hopefully demonstrate fairness, but they will argue, Anita, that because they have to get a specific amount of education as per New York State law, and often master's degrees, additional educational costs, that is where they try and justify their salaries at the moment. But does it go beyond that, Frank? Is there an element here of pension fraud? Is there an element here that the public needs to understand better about this issue?
Well, two things. To answer what that teacher, and I did answer it on the program, he's saying they have to get master's degrees and extra credits if they want to raise their salaries higher. But the point is, in our nation, we're a free enterprise nation. We're not a socialist government fully yet. We're getting there, right?
Not yet.
But what should drive the salaries that we have to pay our teachers and any employees is the same principle that should guide us as what guides private industry, which is the market. And the key fact I pointed out to, I forget the gentleman's name, was Michael something. The key fact was that in Long Island school districts, on average for the past 40 years, and I've checked this 6 times, I've foiled it, gotten the information from a couple of different school districts, we have had between 100 and 200 applicants for every open public school teacher position. Typically about 150 applicants per open position. Even if only half of them are very well qualified, or only a third, you're talking about 50 people dying to get a particular teaching job. New York City teachers, it's not the same. There, it's harder for them to get qualified people to take the positions. Their classes are higher, they've got a rougher job, and they don't get the high salaries that our teachers get in Long Island or Westchester. But the point is, the market's suggesting we don't have to pay these salaries. It's because the school boards kowtow to the teacher unions. They're terrified. They don't want their kids, who are typically in the school system, to be penalized by any of the teachers because they're taking a tough line in dealing with teacher negotiations. So they cave in. On the pensions, the new pension reform, which is I think what the question was about, it's a step in the right direction. It now requires all public employees to pay 3% of their salary into the pension plan, not just for the first 10 years, which is the way it was for the recent decades. They only paid 3% of their salary for 10 years. If they worked another 20 or 25 years, they paid nothing. That resulted in public employee unions members paying about 6%, 5 to 7% roughly, of their total pension costs. 93% or thereabouts, 95%, was paid by the taxpayers. Now they've changed it, good step forward. They now have to pay 3% for every year they work, which ups it to about 20% that they're going to be paying of their pension costs. Private industry, it's 50%, but it's only right now it's up to 20% for new employees. What we've got to do, and a key problem with all this, is that existing employees are not affected by this. Key employees are not affected. It only pertains to new employees starting in January 2010. So the only way, and again, consider too that the pensions that they get, teachers, by the way, in my school district, Port Washington, in 2008, the average pension paid was $75,000, pension to the teachers that retired. Their salaries were $100,000. The average, Anita mentioned $93,000. In Port Washington, the median salary is $100,000. So pensions are very generous. The public employees know how to manipulate the system legally, but because of the legislators kowtowing to the unions, they've put in formulas that enable public employees to boost their pensions to ridiculously high levels compared to the salaries they're making and compared to the principles that govern private industry. So the only way, in summary, the only way we could get 98% of the employees in 2010 to contribute a more fair and reasonable amount to their pension costs, since the Constitution forbids us from applying the new 3% rule for all years to the existing employees, the only way to legally do this is to not give them more cost of living adjustment increases. So that's the key step we've got to take for teachers. By the way, teachers have agreed to pay 3.5% a year in return for getting a lower retirement age of 57 instead of 62. But in order to get them to the existing teachers who are not affected by the new pension reform in Tier 5, the only way to legally get them to pay a fair and reasonable part of their pension costs is not give them a cost of living adjustment on top of the step increases which they already get. People don't realize this. Public employees get 2 types of increases. They get step increases for living and working another year. They're typically 3 to 4%. On top of the step increases, public employees get a second increase called the cost of living adjustment, COLA, COLA they call it. They adjust these in the contract negotiations. They say, well, inflation has hit us by 2 or 3% a year. We want to up all our steps by 2 or 3% more than the 3 to 4% they already get. So in effect, most employees are getting 5 to 7% increases each year. Not every employee, but most employees. All teachers in Port Washington, as an example, who do not qualify for the step increase, and that's a minority of them, maybe a third, they're all earning over $100,000. So, but all the teachers earning below $100,000, just about all of them, are getting step increases plus cost of living. Now the question is, what is the cost of living in 2009 and 10? It's negative. There is no increase. The CPI is negative.
And
That's a good
just to
point.
that point, I would just like to
Well,
share.
let me just finish it. If the CPI is negative, which it is nationally and in the New York metro area, if anything, there should be a negative cost of living adjustment.
If anything, right.
Right, that's out of the question. So all we could do, therefore, in order to take into account the difficult fiscal times, take into account the fact that the CPI is negative, and take into account the fact that the current employees cannot be hit with this higher pension cost, the only way to justly and fairly do this is to freeze their salaries for the next 3 years.
There was a lot you shared with the viewers there, and I'd like to just summarize it and see if you agree with it, which is, so we understand that they passed reform, but the reform is diluted. The real impact of that reform won't benefit the state for decades.
Correct.
So the current problems, it's really sugarcoating it. It's not addressing it. And then the other issue is you're making the point that with CPI actually being negative, with senior citizens who received no cost of living increase this year because of that CPI
Social Security,
number,
right.
but the teachers are able to get around it. And then they add, I will just share with you, as I work in financial services, that people in the consulting community in financial services, where there is 100,000 employees who've been displaced by the recent market decline, that is just in the tri-state area, that billing rates have gone down 30 to 35% year over year. My costs are the same, and yet, despite the fact that I have close to 25 years of exceptional experience in financial services, I'm obtaining a lower income. That's the point I think we're all trying to make here, but I just wanted to make sure that people understood that this Tier 5, while it promises a great deal of reform, and I actually think there was an element in it too that also was somewhat beneficial to the teachers in the sense that the teachers' unions were not asked to keep to the same requirements that the rest of the other public employees
Well,
were.
right, I didn't realize that.
Well, the retirement age was raised from 55 to 57, as Frank said,
For teachers.
for teachers, but for everyone else,
62.
62. So again, their leadership in the union was able to flex its muscle, and so again, special interest won out over. But when you know, Frank said it so well. Senior citizens are frozen. They're not getting any more money, and they're already on a diminished income. Their retirement savings have gone down as a result of the stock market decline, and no increase in their annual cost of living adjustments. But teachers who are already making $93,000 a year are continuing to get those.
It's this astounding stability
And
benefit they're
Newsday was
getting.
actually expressing in direct compliments to the 6 or 8 school districts in Long Island that gave them COLA increases of only about 2%. Why should they get any cost of living adjustment
Oh, I
when it's
agree.
negative?
And,
It's
and meanwhile, they're
absurd.
not even making the point that there is no cost of living
Exactly.
increase. They're not making the
Exactly.
point. So that's why a lot of taxpayers are in the dark.
Exactly.
Now, just to go a little more into the education issue, right now New York spends more per pupil on education than 48 or 49 other states. And yet the test results show that we're only in about the mid-range. So does this call for more money to be thrown at education, or are there other ways to address this?
I don't think it calls for more money to be thrown at education. I think what we have to do is we have to, really look at the measurements that we're using. Although compared to the national standards, most of the test scores of New York State students are declining. With respect to New York State standards, they appear to be improving. So it seems as if New York State is diluting the overall testing measurement. And I think Merrill Tisch, who's the head of the Board of Regents, is aware of this, and I think she has made a statement that they are going to be looking into this. I had read something that in one of the regents, you passed with a 44% score. That's
a disgrace.
It's unbelievable to me. I think what we have to do is look at some more creative issues. We have to introduce some competition into the education system. Currently, we have an education monopoly, and monopolies are not very efficient. Charter schools, we should have more charter schools.
We're hearing more and more about them.
Where there is competition. Michelle Rhee in Washington, D.C. is leading the charge for more charter schools and more innovative ways of rewarding teachers who are really great. I mean, a great teacher is a wonderful resource, who should be rewarded, who should be compensated accordingly. A rock star teacher, is a great thing and can inspire so many children. But unfortunately, not every teacher is a rock star and is inspirational.
And the way the payment schedule is working right now, the way the system works, is they're not
There's
rewarded.
a disincentive for motivation.
A disincentive. That's a good way to put it.
show up and breathe, and you know, I get rewarded.
Right.
Well, it's
Frank?
clear that money is not the problem in New York. New York State is always the first or second highest state in dollars spent per pupil. We spend about $16,000 per pupil. In Long Island, it's well over $20,000 per pupil.
More like
Plus,
29, 30,000.
in some school districts. In my
Yes.
school district, it's 25,000, and Anita's is probably closer to 30,000. In the nation, it's about $10,000 per pupil. Now, where do we stand compared to the other 49 states? Every time I've looked at it on the NAEP test results, which are the most reliable test results administered by the federal government, National Assessment of Educational Progress. They're the best recognized tests, the most appropriate tests because they're not finagled, as many state tests are.
The most legitimate.
Yeah, the most legitimate. They were giving them 4th, 8th, 12th grade math, reading, writing. We come out always in the 20th to 30th position. Just about every single year we come out in the middle, in spite of spending more than 48 or 49 other states. The one area that spends more than all 50 states is Washington, D.C., and they, believe it or not, every year come out in 51st position. They're the worst. So money is not the problem.
Clearly not.
I mean, right. If you know, it can be a problem if you spend way too little. If you're trying to get by on, you know, some...
God forbid.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it could be, but that's nowhere near the case in New York State. The problem is, and I think Nita was suggesting it, if we went to a renewable tenure system, why should teachers after 3 years get permanent tenure, which means their performance is no longer relevant for whether
And
they're going to
it's
keep
not
their
an
job?
issue.
That's right. And why should the worst teacher get as much pay as the best teacher? There should be a merit pay system. The unions are resisting it like anything. They're saying it's going to be unfair. Yes, I understand the concern over fairness. My company, AT&T and New York Telephone, we had a merit pay system, and I'd say 95% of the time it was fair. You got to go to break.
Frank, I'm going to ask you to just pause for a second. We're at the halfway point in our show. Our discussion tonight is on New York State's fiscal crisis and our high tax situation. We're going to pause for a public service announcement, and we'll be right back.
My hero hasn't traveled the world, doesn't star on her own TV show, can't sing very well. My hero didn't plan on being pregnant, put her career on hold, chose to have and love me. My hero, my mom.
If you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, learn more today about parenting or adoption. While there are unwanted pregnancies, there are no unwanted children.
My hero isn't able to slam dunk, doesn't make $1 million a year, can't rap at all. My hero helped my mom when she was pregnant, takes care of us, chose to have and love me. My hero, my dad.
If you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, learn more today about parenting or adoption. While there are unwanted pregnancies, there are no unwanted children.